Well, today we are going to go back again to the Old Testament. This time we're going to look at 1 Samuel chapter 3, beginning with verse 19, and we're going to go to chapter 4, verse 1. Some of the commentators said this was a bad division of the chapters. 4:1 should have been part of chapter 3. A little bit later, we're going to go back and look at some of the verses before this. But for now, 1 Samuel 3, beginning with verse 19. The Lord was with Samuel as he grew up, and he let none of Samuel's words fall to the ground. And all Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, recognized that Samuel was attested as a prophet of the Lord. The Lord continued to appear at Shiloh, and there he revealed himself to Samuel through his word. And Samuel's word came to all Israel. So what I want us to notice out of this particular passage is that for a man who is called to be a prophet of God, a spokesperson during this Old Testament era, this passage indicates success. This passage teaches us that for that job, for God's mission, for that calling, Samuel was good at it. Samuel succeeded. He had a victory with it. So I kind of want to go back through and just kind of show how this passage says that in a couple of different ways. First of all, it says that God was with Samuel as he grew up. And so we find, in fact, if you want some interesting reading, go back and read 1 Samuel 1 and 2 to get a little bit of Samuel's birth story and what happened to him at a very young age. And you'll see that God was with him very early. The fact that he was with Samuel as he grew up gives us that idea that he had come to know the Lord early in his life, and he learned more, and that from that early start, their relationship had remained steady. I once had a professor who was talking about how so many times, we love to hear the story of people who went out deep into sin. They joined a violent motorcycle gang, not a friendly motorcycle club, but a violent motorcycle gang, and they did drugs and they ran around with women and all these things. And then they got miraculously saved and converted and became completely different persons. And we think, what a success story that is. And he said, you know what I like better? I like to hear those stories of those who as 4, 5-year-olds, 8-year-olds, they come to know the Lord and they serve Him for the rest of their life. And they have their stumbles and stuff, but they never go out into deep sin. They never have some of these dysfunctional things that come into their lives. He said that's actually a better story. And that's kind of Samuel's story. He started young, stayed with the Lord, didn't have those big episodes of going deep into sin, and then later coming back to the Lord. Well, let's move on. The next phrase is that the Lord let none of Samuel's words fall to the ground. I like this imagery. It doesn't rhyme, but it's kind of poetic language. It's kind of a figure of speech. It's really a figurative way of saying that Samuel's words were effective. When he talked, people listened. He didn't just talk and have his words fall to the ground. They made contact. They reached people. You ever feel like when you're talking to somebody, and if you're a parent, we could maybe use children as the example, and you feel like you might as well be talking to the wall. That's not how it was for Samuel. As a pastor, I've been doing this a long time, to other congregations besides you. See, you'd never do this. But some of my other congregations, I would preach and I just feel like I might as well be preaching in my office by myself because no one's getting it. And in fact, I had one guy in my church, he would occasionally come to me after the service and say, Pastor, that would have been a really good service if so-and-so had been here today. They needed to hear that. Always kind of interesting. But Samuel didn't have that issue. Remember those, most of us are old enough, I think. Remember those E.F. Hutton commercials? These guys would be talking, it might be kind of a crowd murmuring and different people discussing. And this one guy would say to his friend or whoever he's conversing with, well, my broker is E.F. Hutton. And he says, and then everybody in the room around him, they kind of freeze and they kind of lean over to hear. They got to hear what E.F. Hutton has to say. Yeah. Well, apparently that's how it was for Samuel. It's like, the Lord let none of Samuel's words fall to the ground. That's really what that's all about. What a blessing for a person who's trying to be a messenger of God. That shows that he was successful. Then it says that all Israel recognized that Samuel was attested as a prophet of the Lord. And so we're told that in these particular days, if you went back and read the earlier parts, that the Lord wasn't talking very much at this particular time in Israel's history. There wasn't a lot of prophets around. It was just kind of more of a silent time. They were moving on, coming nearing the end of the time of the judges. And God's messages were kind of few and far between. And so when somebody became kind of a public speaker or figure, there was always the question about whether or not they were a prophet of God or just someone tooting their own horn or whatever. But we're told that Samuel was recognized that he really was a prophet of the Lord. He was the real thing, and so even though it was kind of a rare thing in that particular time period, they said Samuel's one of them. And so that's another one of those indicators that he was successful. He wasn't doubted. He wasn't questioned as being a false prophet. And one of the tests of the prophets was, are the words they say coming true? If they tell you that this is what the Lord is doing and that never happens, then it's like, well, maybe that wasn't a word from the Lord. So Samuel was known to be telling things that were true. And I also think that one of the things that would attest to him as being a real prophet is that his walk must have matched his talk. He practiced what he preached. If he was telling them that they need to be more honest in their dealings, we can bet that Samuel was honest in his dealings. If he's telling them that they need to be more loving of their neighbors, then you can bet that Samuel was being loving to his neighbors. And those kinds of things. Whatever he was teaching the people, whatever God was telling him, he was living that way himself. And that's one of the ways that he was recognized as a prophet of the Lord. It then says that the Lord continued to appear at Shiloh, which is where, before the temple in Jerusalem or whatever they were, Shiloh was kind of the religious center. And there he revealed himself to Samuel through his word. So if you're looking for a good source to be able to spread the news, you always hear, you see the reporters always looking for that confidential informant, someone who can tell them what's going on, an insider. Samuel had the best source. He had the Lord himself revealing himself to Samuel through his word. So he kept talking to Samuel and telling Samuel things that he wanted Samuel to pass on to others. And then it kind of concludes this section by saying that Samuel's word came to all Israel. So he was headquartered in Shiloh, but of course Israel had become a country. And there were these 12 tribes, and they all had their own areas, and they were spread about. And we're told that somehow Samuel's word would spread. He was able to have this nationwide reach, not just around the city of Shiloh. One might wonder how that could be. This was when there was no broadcasting, there was no Fox News or CNN, there was no internet, How did the word get all over Israel? Well, apparently word of mouth. And it was a very effective word of mouth because it says that his word came to all Israel. And so that must have really been something. So when you put all this together, and when you consider that Samuel was kind of called to be a prophet of God, for a man called by God as a spokesperson in the Old Testament, this passage indicates success. Samuel was fulfilling his call. He was apparently good at what he was doing, and the Lord gave him great success. What I really want us to focus on today, though, is what was the secret of Samuel's success? Why was he so good at being a prophet for the Lord, or a spokesperson from the Lord? Well, first of all, God did his part. God was going to be the one that taught him and spoke to him and gave him the messages. God did his part. But what about from Samuel's side? What is it about Samuel that made him able to be successful and effective as a prophet? I think the key is found in a literal childhood story that becomes a figurative, lifelong pattern. And so we're going to look at that story by going back to the beginning of 1 Samuel chapter 3, beginning with verses 1 to 10. Well, we're going to end with verses 1 to 10 as well. Verses 1 to 10. Again, if you want to hear the interesting part of the story, go back and read chapters 1 and 2, and it'll tell you how Samuel got to this point. But he's a young boy living in the temple with the priest Eli. And so that's where this story picks up. Chapter 3, verse 1. The boy Samuel ministered before the Lord under Eli. In those days, the word of the Lord was rare, and there were not many visions. One night, Eli, whose eyes were becoming so weak that he could barely see, was lying down in his usual place. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the house of the Lord where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called Samuel. Samuel answered, "Here I am." And he ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called me." But Eli said, "I did not call. Go back and lie down." So he went and lay down. Again the Lord called, "Samuel." And Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called me." "My son," Eli said, "I did not call. Go back and lie down." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. A third time the Lord called, "Samuel." And Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called me." Then Eli realized that the Lord was calling the boy. So Eli told Samuel, "Go and lie down, and if he calls you, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. The Lord came and stood there, calling as at the other times, "Samuel, Samuel." Then Samuel said, "Speak, for your servant is listening." And it's that last phrase that I think is the key to all of this. Then Samuel said, "Speak, for your servant is listening." In this case, as a young boy, the Lord being present in some form, we don't know what form it was, an audible voice that Samuel is confusing with Eli's voice says Samuel, and Samuel goes to Eli 3 times. The 4th time, the Lord is here again and says Samuel. And Samuel says, "Speak, for your servant is listening." So he said it literally as a child. But I believe that for the rest of his life, he continued to seek the Lord's words, and he listened. It's as if he was constantly saying, "Speak, your servant is listening." And I believe that he did that from that day on. From then on, he followed that particular pattern. I want to just pause a moment and talk a little bit about that word listening. It's a word that we use all the time, and we bandied about and talk about, "Yeah, I'm listening." But I want to point out that in the ancient language, that it's not the same as hearing. Listening and hearing are different. Listening includes taking it to heart. It includes acting on it. The old radio call signs, they would say Roger. And it came about after a 2 or 3 generation kind of thing. Roger became the phonetic word that you would say so that people know that you meant the letter R. R as in Roger. It initially had been Morse code, and the R had been kind of the Morse code for radio type people that meant received. So when you received the message, you heard it, you would say Roger. And then there came the time where the radio signs, for a while, they would say Roger Wilco. Anybody remember Roger Wilco?
Yeah, sure.
Wilco was also a symbol, an acronym, the WIL and then the CO for will comply. So when you said Roger, that means you heard the message. When you said Wilco, that means you'll do what you were told. You'll follow the message. You will obey. And so the word listening in the ancient language had built into it the idea of not just Roger, but also Wilco. It meant to hear and obey. So if you were listening, you weren't just hearing. Sometimes Robin can say some instruction. Wilson, take your plate to the sink. And then later she'll say, well, did you hear me? Yeah, I heard you. Well, you didn't take your plate to the sink. Well, I forgot. Whatever. So sometimes we hear, but we don't really listen. And again, I want to pick on children. That's why I picked on myself just now. But, as a parent, there have been times when you thought they're not even listening, and they go, well, I heard you. And then they just go off and do what they please. So the idea of listening, when he said, speak, your servant is listening, he meant, I'm hearing and obeying. I'm going to do what you tell me. Well, let's jump forward a few thousand years to today. We are called to be Christ-like disciples. And I believe that the same thing that made Samuel a success as an Old Testament prophet can make us successful as Christ-like disciples. That is, we need to say, speak, your servant is listening. And if we will do that and do it sincerely, then I think we can be successful Christ-like disciples. So I want to just give you some examples of some times when we should ask the Lord to speak. When we read the Bible, He's already spoken to us through the Word, and every time we read it, there's an opportunity for him to speak to us again. And I think it's going to be more effective if, as you begin that reading, you tell the Lord, speak, talk to me. Don't just let me read these words, but let these words message me in today's setting. So we need to ask the Lord to speak whenever we read the Bible. Here's a good one. When we listen to a sermon, nothing special about me other than my calling. God said, I want certain people to kind of make a career out of this, spend your life preaching my word. But I'm no Einstein. But if you come here, before I begin, you say, Lord, I'm gonna hear the pastor, but more importantly, as he speaks, I want you to speak to me. I want to hear your word through his, under his, between the lines, whatever concept you can think of it. Ask the Lord to speak to you when I'm speaking. And I don't mean that in any kind of a messianic, complex way. But ask him to speak to you through his word. When you attend a Bible study, right now, our ladies get together pretty often. They do a study, take a few weeks off, start another study. But besides hearing what the author of the book says, besides hearing what Kim or whoever might be leading it says, ask the Lord, you speak to me through this study tonight. Speak to me. When we wake up for the day, can you think about it that way? You wake up in the morning, as you're getting out of bed, it's like, good morning, Lord. Which, by the way, is very different from good Lord, morning. There's an old evangelistic preacher who was known for his humor. And he talked about how before he was a Christian, he used to get up and say, good Lord, morning. After he became a Christian, he got up and said, good morning, Lord. But after you say good morning, Lord, say, Lord, speak to me today. Say something to me. Let me hear your voice. Talk to me throughout the day. Speak to me. When we don't know what to think or what to do, and sometimes when we think we know what to do, or when we think we do know, that we are faced with constant issues. You hear something in the news. Should I think that's a good thing or a bad thing? Lord, you tell me. Don't make me figure it out on my own. Should I take this job or that job? Lord, speak to me. Lord, I think like my neighbor is having a downtime, needs some help. What should I do? Speak to me. So those times when you don't know what to do or what to think, and again, like I said, sometimes you think you do know, and you find out you don't. That's another time to ask the Lord to speak. Any decision you have to make, ask the Lord to speak. Constant. So those are some sample times of when you should be asking the Lord to speak, as Samuel did. So now I want to just share times when we should listen. That is, hear and obey. Every single time the Lord speaks. So if you're asking to speak, he will. When he does, make sure you're listening. And that means to hear and obey. The Lord says, you need to be more loving to your neighbor. I don't want to love my neighbor. Pretty soon he stops speaking if you're not listening. You've got to speak and listen. Let's pray.